Today I'm going to bring you an amazing TENPAI Dragon deck profile with options for budget players too. What's potion? You got Matt here and welcome to another competitive Yu-Gi-Oh video. Legacy of Destruction is officially available at your local OTS, which means if you're interested in playing TENPAI Dragon, you've come to the right place. Because in this video, I'll bring you the ultimate TENPAI Dragon deck profile, I'll explain why each individual card is in the list, and I'll even give you options for budget players too. Welcome to episode number 2 of TENPAI Dragon Week. By the end of it, you'll know how to beat and play TENPAI Dragon. So if you're excited for the video, then make sure to smash the like button. If this video hits 250 likes, I'll bring you the ultimate TENPAI Dragon combo guide with test hands. Also, if you like competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, including deck profiles, guides on how to beat the best decks, meta discussions, and videos just like this one, you're gonna love this channel. So make sure to subscribe. But with that being said, here is the best TENPAI Dragon deck profile for the post-Legacy of Destruction competitive Yu-Gi-Oh format. Let's jump into it. So jumping into the actual deck profile, we have a 41 card main deck, 15 card side, and 15 card extra deck. I do want to say that there are some cards in here that may not be super traditional, but I'm going to explain why I have everything, and I'll also at the end of the video go over why certain cards are not in the actual list as well. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get started with our main deck here. Of course, we're going to start off with our TENPAI Dragon monsters, of which we have TENPAI Dragon Hydra, 3 copies of TENPAI Dragon Chandra, and 2 copies of TENPAI Dragon Phadra. These cards are all great. This is the perfect ratio in my opinion. We have 3 copies of Pedra and Chandra rather, because these 2 cards are essentially your starters for the strategy. Pedra on normal or special summon allows you to search for a Sangen spell or trap, so the quick play or the field spell right now. Chandra is great because on normal or special, or at the start of the damage step, if a monster battles, you can special summon a TENPAI Dragon from your deck except for another copy of itself. Phadra has another effect. The reason why it's at 2 copies is because it doesn't really do much on its own. Essentially, on normal or special summon, or again at the start of the damage step, if a monster battles, you can target a TENPAI in your graveyard and special summon it to your side of the field, which is great. This is the perfect lineup for TENPAI Dragon monsters. Moving on to our Sangen spells and traps. Right now, it's just only going to be the spell cards, but we have, of course, 3 copies of Sangen Kaimen and 3 copies of Sangen Summoning. These two cards, oh my god, are fantastic. But I also want to add in the 1 copy of Terraforming here as well. So essentially, Sangen Kaimen is your Rhoda for the deck, but it's also going to be a way to be an E-Telly essentially as well during the battle phase, because you're adding to hand and then special summoning, which is great. This is how you get a lot of your plays going, because you want to use this card in the battle phase. And Sangen Summoning is obviously fantastic because it gives you protection. It's a starter. It helps OTK. It is the best card in the deck by a mile, and that's why we play Terraforming as well, because it gets us access to another copy essentially of Sangen Summoning, having 4 copies in our deck. The cards I've shown you so far, the 15 cards I've shown you, the 3 white, 3 red, 2 green, the 3 of each spell, and then the Terraforming, 15 cards there, those are mandatory to play in every single TENPAI Dragon list, in my opinion. The rest is really up to you, but the rest of the deck comes down to preference as well for what you want to do for consistency. That being said, for additional consistency, I'm playing the 1 copy of Set Rotation with the 1 copy of Way Where There's a Will. This is a new spell card, new field spell from Legacy of Destruction. It's a really solid card that essentially acts as Pot of Prosperity, because when you activate it once per turn, the turn player can basically excavate the top number of cards from their deck equal to the number of cards their opponent controls. So if they have 5 cards, you excavate the top 5, you then add 1 to hand, and then you put 1 card from your hand to the bottom of the deck. And Set Rotation is here because it essentially acts as our 5th copy of Sangen Summoning, because we'll have Terraforming, the field spell itself, and Set Rotation as well. That's why we have these cards over here. Not super mandatory, but I like them for extra bits of consistency. Speaking of consistency, we're playing 3 copies of Pot of Prosperity. Fantastic option in this deck. You can OTK through Pot of Prosperity very easily with this strategy, which is really important to be able to justify playing this card. It's as close to a mandatory card that you can get, because it helps you get access to your engine, which you're not always going to see because there's only 15 cards in the actual engine itself, and most of the time you want 2 of those cards to really get the proper OTK. If you don't have Trident Dragon, there's an argument to be made to not play Pot of Prosperity, because you can't always OTK through it if you don't have the Trident Dragon. But that over here is 20 cards so far in the main deck, and that is basically going to be our engine and our consistency pieces already taken care of. The rest of the cards in the deck is going to be your non-engine. Starting off though, there's 3 ways that you can actually play the non-engine. You can play it as a pure board breaker version, you can play it as a pure hand trap version, or you can play it as a combination of the 2, and I personally prefer a combination of the 2. So, starting off with the board breakers, I have of course the one copy of Harpy's Feather Duster and the one copy of Lightning Storm. I was debating putting in a second copy of Lightning Storm. I really like it as back row removal and just destroying monsters, which is really nice, but I have other board breakers that I want to keep in mind, so I felt like having just the one copy made a lot of sense. Moving on though, we're also playing 3 copies of Forbidden Droplet. This card is fantastic in this deck. It really is just so incredible because you can use it in the battle phase, you can use it going first, you can use it as a way to handle some cards that would be really annoying for you to out, for example, like the Lyrilisca Assembled Nightingale as an example. And there's just so many really good situations to use Forbidden Droplet that I highly recommend playing this in the deck, even if you're playing a pure hand trap version of this strategy. And the last board breaker is 3 copies of Super Polymerization. I think Super Poly is really underrated in this format, and I think that most builds aren't going to actually play Super Poly in their main deck for the time being, but I kind of want to use it because I find that just having access to Super Poly to get rid of some really big threats is obviously amazing, but it's also, just like Forbidden Droplet, a board breaker that can also do well if I'm forced to go first, which can be really good. And at the same time, one of the weaker matchups this deck has is to Yubel. Having these cards here does help with the Yubel matchup, which a lot of hand traps right now just aren't as good against. That being said, this is my board breaker lineup, these 8 cards. Now we can move on to the last 13 cards of the deck, being our hand traps, and like I said, I have 13 of them. We are playing over 40 cards. We're at 41 in the main deck, but honestly, I think 41 is fine for this specific strategy. There's so much consistency, so it makes a lot of sense. That being said, we have 3 copies of Ash Blossom, we have 3 copies of Ghost Bell, we have 3 copies of Imperm. We're also playing 3 copies of Valor and the 1 copy of the Bestial Magnamut. So let's take our time here and go over each of these cards and explain why I'm playing these ones here. Well, first off, Ash is incredibly generic and it'll always have application against pretty much every single deck because searching, sending to graveyard, summoning from deck is all really important. Ghost Bell is nice because it helps me deal with some bigger power plays that certain decks have, like for example, the Princess or Flambridge effects to revive cards, Albion's effect to revive like Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, which is really nice, and of course it also is really good against Low, the Prayers of the Voiceless Voice, to summon itself back too, which is usually going to be Chainlink 2 in a ritual summon of Skull Guardian. We are playing the Imperm because it's a great generic interruption on either player's turn. It's good going first, it's good going second, because if we have nothing on the field, we can just shotgun Imperm as a board breaker as well, which can be really nice. And then we do have another targeting negate in the effect Valor, but I think its inclusion is a little bit debatable. It's really more matchup dependent, and it's honestly a common side card for me to take out when I'm going first. There are a lot of other really common options, like you can play Nibiru, for example, or Ghost Mourner, you can play Dimension Shifter, really. Those are all options to play instead of Valor, but I like having Valor in the main deck for the time being, but it is definitely the hand trap that has the least amount of staying power, and I might just switch it out down the line. And then we have Bestial Magnamut. This is essentially the 41st card of the deck, but not really. Like, I'd rather take out a copy of Effect Valor than I would rather take out the Magnamut, because Magnamut is essentially consistency and interruption, and at the same time, if you have Magnamut on the field because you used it on your opponent's turn to interrupt them, and then you normal summon Chandra, you're in a fantastic position to just win the game in an instant. Magnamut is an awesome card. But that being said, that's our 13 hand traps here. We have a good mix of board breakers and of hand traps for this specific build, and I'm really happy with the lineup that I have right now. Moving on though to our extra deck, we have quite a few different cards I want to talk about, but the main ones are going to be, of course, our Synchros. But before we get to that, I want to start off with our Super Poly targets, being the one Garura and the one Mud Dragon of the Swamp. These cards are really good for Super Poly. Obviously, Mud Dragon stopping targeting is really nice as well. You can turn into a fire, could be cool. It is a 4. I was debating playing an 8. A level 8 Synchro in my extra deck to be able to Synchro with Chandra and Mud Dragon, but honestly, it's way too niche. It doesn't make sense to do. On the other hand, Garura is a level 6, so you can make a level 10 Synchro with Chandra and Garura as well, which is really cool. And of course, having the ability to just suck up boards with Super Poly to go into these guys is really nice. I am playing the one copy of Hieratic Seal of Heavenly Spheres, and this is the only Link monster I am playing in the strategy. No, I am not playing the Raging Phoenix OTK, and if you guys want me to explain why, I'm going to do so at the very end of this talk about the extra deck, so stick around. But Spheres is just incredible. It allows you to get interruption, it sets up a board wipe with Black Rose Dragon because of its summon from the deck effect, and more. It's a mandatory card for anyone playing Tenpai Dragon. But that's it for our non-synchro monsters in the extra deck. Moving on to our synchros, we have of course 2 copies of Sangenpai Bident Dragion. We also have the 1 copy of Sangenpai Transcendent Dragion and the 1 copy of Trident Dragion. Now, these cards are all incredible. I think this is the perfect ratio to have. The 2 copies of Tenpai Dragon are really good because you want to have the ability to potentially go into multiple on a given turn because it gives you access to more tuners that are higher levels to access your higher level synchros as well. But it also has the ability to revive itself. That is a once per duel effect. But you also want to make sure that if you're in a situation where you can't OTK on that first turn, you have a way to get into it again to get the revive effect on summon as well, which is really, really nice. Transcendent Dragon is basically your kill button. Essentially, once this card gets onto the field, you know you're pretty much going to win the duel unless you've done something wrong. There's no way you should be losing the duel once Transcendent Dragon hits the field because it's able to just stop them from activating any cards or effects in the battle phase. It can revive itself, it can pop a card in the field. It is a awesome card. And then we have the 1 copy of Trident Dragon. This here is obviously a really expensive card nowadays, but you can technically play Tenpai Dragon without Trident Dragon. Is it going to be as good? No chance, but you can still do it. If you're not playing Trident Dragon, like I said, you probably want to find a change for Pot of Prosperity to be able to then have an easier time OTKing, because you can't OTK as easily or as consistently through Pot of Prosperity without this card. This is the ratio that I would go with in my opinion. We're also playing the 1 copy of Black Rose Dragon as our level 7 to make on our opponent's turn. It is a great option. We're also playing the 1 copy of Q-Belt, the Blade Dragon, which is my replacement here for the Black Rose Moonlight Dragon. If you have Black Rose Moonlight Dragon, play that instead. It is so much better because it's a bounce. The effect activates on special summon, while Q-Belt only activates on synchro summon. And there is a difference, especially because it also destroys and doesn't return to hand. So very important there. And then one of our last 7s is going to be Odd Eye's Meteor Burst Dragon. Amazing card. Basically, I want to take the time and talk about these 2 cards over here. First off, Black Rose is great because it's a fire dragon, and same thing for Odd Eye's Meteor Burst Dragon. You can easily say, you know what, Sangan Summoning, summon out 2 of our Tenpai monsters, 1 tuner, 1 non-tuner, and then you can just synchro into Black Rose. Your opponent can't activate cards to negate the effect of Black Rose Dragon because of the field spell, and then you can blow up the entire board so it's completely uninterrupted. And if you have access to Sangan Summoning, for example, or Sangan Kaiman rather, in your hand, you can always use the effect, summon out a copy of Vadra, and then be able to revive back your tuners and start the plays going all over again. Really crazy. And Meteor Burst Dragon is also great because it also is a fire dragon monster. So while Sangan Summoning protects you during the battle phase, or the main phase rather, Meteor Burst protects you during the battle phase. So if you make this during main phase 1, go to battle phase, activate Sangan Kaiman, your opponent can't go for Ash Blossom, which is really, really good. So that's why this card is here. Very important card. Moving on though, we do have the 1 copy of Vagnawa the Moon Eating Dragon. This card is really, really niche. And the reason why it's here though is because I want to be able to have a way to do a bit of chip damage for situations where we're late in the game, late in the round. So I want to have this here as well. It does do a bit of chip damage for each level the tuner has. It does 300 damage to your opponent, which is really nice. So you're usually going to be doing 1200 points of damage because the Chandra is a level 4. But other than that, it doesn't really come up too often. Moving on though to our going first package, we have the 1 copy of Ancient Fairy Dragon with Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon and Ultimaya Zolkin. This is going to be my going first package. A lot of the time, people will say, you know what, I want, instead of playing these cards here, I want to play the Raging Phoenix OTK. But the reason why I'm not doing that is because of 2 reasons. First off, firstly, you can really only use that line, or you really only want to use the Raging Phoenix OTK line when you're under Dimensional Barrier, and that's pretty much it. And not everyone will be siding D-Barrier, but even if they are, they can't really control when they see it. But anyone can control when they make you go first, so it's more likely for that to come up than the Raging Phoenix line. So I want to have a way to get at least a negate and interruption when I'm going first and not just potentially lose if I don't draw my side deck cards. And the second reason why I'm not playing the Raging Phoenix OTK is because I just don't have it. If you want to play it, you absolutely can. Is it better than this line here? It's debatable, only time will tell what ends up being the best way to play it, but I personally prefer this lineup right now. And if you do play that line, you'll probably have to drop Super Poly and the Garura and the Mud Dragon to really make the space. So it is what it is. Just decide if that's what you want to go with or not. But that's going to be 14 cards on our extra deck now. Our last card is a bit of a, well, it's a toss-up really. You can decide what you want to add here. The last one I have in this current deck right now is Ruddy Rose Dragon. This is an option for some people. It's a really good budget option that's really good for a lot of different decks right now because some of the cards that you would play in this spot have gone up in price. But the other options that you can play, in my opinion, are going to be Samurai Destroyer or Time Lord Progenitor Vorpgate or Nirvana High Paladin. It really depends on what your meta is looking like though, because in my personal area, no one is playing Yubel, and right now, I'm the only one that's on runic decks in my locals area right now, and if I'm going to go to a higher level event, then I'll probably make a change and put in something like the Vorpgate. That's my preference over the other cards in this specific instance, but I like Ready Rose because it's so good against these fire decks by banishing the entire graveyards. It ends up being a really awesome way to just stop them from having any follow-up at all if you can't OTK. But like I said, this is a flex spot for the deck. You can definitely make a move and put something else in its place. Moving on to our side deck though, we have 3 copies of Heatwave. Heatwave is an awesome card in this deck. It is not a mandatory card by any means. It's also pretty expensive. It's like 15 to 20 bucks per copy now, which is ridiculous, but it's essentially a card that makes so I can't lose when I'm going first. If I just slap down Heatwave at the start of my main phase, then my opponent can summon monsters, and I'm in a really good position to have a chance to just OTK them the next time I get a turn. It also doesn't really lose to interruption like the Zolkin line does, and the reason why is because they can just imperm the Ancient Fairy Dragon and make life really difficult, but Heatwave they have a hard time interacting with, which is really important. Next up though, we have 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird, another really solid option here. It just is kind of deck dependent if you're going to be siding it in. A lot of decks are searching nowadays, and having access to Droll to stop that is also really cool. And because we're going second, every once in a while we're going to run across some decks that are just like going to spit out their entire hand onto the field, try and just go absolutely crazy with all the adding and try and FD us essentially. So I want to have Droll to kind of shut that down. And we're also playing 3 copies of Dimension Shifter as our last hand trap in the lineup here. D-Shifter is great. I wanted to main it, but I really like the non-engine lineup that I have right now. But really, D-Shifter only comes in for specific matchups that I really want to focus on shutting off the graveyard for. It does clash though with Droll and with the copy of Forbidden Droplet in the main deck, and even with Effect Veiler, but I think it's worth it anyways. And even then, if you have Shifter and Veiler in hand, you can always go activate Shifter, chain Veiler, so that way the Veiler can still go to the graveyard before the Shifter is done resolving, and that's a really good way to negate something while also getting Shifter in the graveyard as well. We then of course have 3 copies of D-Barrier. D-Barrier is an amazing card in this format right now. It's here for Tenpai, Purely, Branded, Voiceless Voice, and among so many other decks in the format. It's a great card here, and against those strategies, with these 6 cards, I'm starting off with 6 cards that are essentially turn skips against those decks, which is really, really nice. And then of course we have 2 copies of Cosmic Cyclone. I love this card, this format, probably to a fault. I think it's so good. I was considering putting it in the main deck actually. Getting rid of the field spells or sniping back row just feels really, really good. So I want to consider it, but for the time being, it's in the side deck. And then we have the 1 copy of Necro Valley as our final card in this profile. So this is basically for any graveyard-based deck. It's really solid against a lot of them, but it's also decent against Runic because they can't shuffle back in cards with Fountain, assuming they don't find like Runic Destruction. It's obviously not a perfect fit, but I'm not playing the Nirvana High Paladin line with Secret Village of the Spellcasters. If I was, then I'd replace this with Secret Village instead, but for the time being, I really like this lineup in this specific list. So that's the deck, but I did want to take the time and talk about a few other cards that aren't in the actual list, but are seeing some consideration. Starting off with the Rocket Package. Now, honestly, as a Dragon Link player, I love this, but since the banning of Barone and Borreload Savage Dragon, it makes no sense to have the Rocket cards be your supplemental engine for Tenpai Dragon. And the same kind of goes for Bestial Dispatter. Sure, it's very easy to make and it offers potential negation, but the fact that the deck plays no real light or dark monsters to act as extenders, it's really hard to justify playing Dispatter in this list. SP Little Knight was also in my extra deck for a little while, but I didn't feel like it was going to be as good as I really needed it to be, so for that reason I decided to pass on it. Now for cards in the main deck, I was actually considering Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit as one of my hand traps because I think it could do really well in this format. But I felt like there are so many other hand traps that I really wanted to play, and I'm really happy with my current lineup, so I decided to skip on it. But who knows, down the line, it might be an awesome card that I have to include. Nibiru was arguably the toughest card for me to cut from the list. I think it's going to be very good this format considering Savage Dragon and Barone are both banned, but I'm making a meta call here for the time being that my hand trap lineup is going to be really solid. But if we do end up in a format where people are summoning out Lyrilisc Assembled Nightingale or Kika Nagashi Fucho after their 5th summon, I may consider putting Nibiru back into the deck as a way to help counter those 2 Xyz monsters. And that's really it. If you're curious about why I didn't include a different card in this deck, then let me know down in the comments below. But thanks for watching this deep dive deck profile onto the Tenpai Dragon archetype. If you made it this far in the video, you must have enjoyed it, so make sure to smash the like button and of course subscribe to the channel for more amazing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh videos. We're in the middle of Tenpai Dragon Week, and by the end of it, you'll know how to beat and play Tenpai Dragon. Check out my sponsor Imperium Duelist and use code OSHEA10 OSHEA10 for 10% off your order. And of course follow me on Twitter and join the Discord server, both of which are linked in the description. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time.